We're extending the bus to get science back up, working with several fluids with advanced oil, and having a grand old time learning trains. This is my experience. It's time for more Factorio in the EXP Journal series. After setting up the main bus and getting over the hump that is the new mall setup, there's been some slight changes to this world. You can say it's a modded change. In the beginning I mentioned a change would happen to this world, and that is this moment, with changing the biter behavior to peaceful mode, an inherent feature of the game as a button toggle. In peaceful mode, biters don't expand and don't attack when bothered by pollution. They'll only attack you when you or your structures attack them first. My reasoning for making this change was the uncertainty of the biters if I was falling behind in general with defenses and/or damage. And it ties with a mechanic of the biters called evolution, where biters progressively get stronger and introduce spitters into the mix. What determines their evolution factor is on three things: time, pollution, and spawner kills. The first two especially is what got me worried, because I'm roughly 19.5 hours in and reached 36% evolution. Because of how slow I was going, and with the lumen pressure of biters showing up out of nowhere, it made it stressful for me to learn. So I installed the mod so I can just learn in peace. Though installing a mod, unfortunately, has booted me out of earning Steam achievements, so that was a hefty price to pay. However, I'm still going to do more playthroughs after this anyways. Now the second thing I've changed is that my toolbar has expanded with more options, allowing me to import blueprints. Normally you'll have to research a specific technology to unlock it, but I created a separate new world with creative mode essentially to have all technology researched, and it globally gave me new options relating to blueprints. This is so whenever I hit a wall again, I'm able to import a blueprint and directly observe the layout to get inspired and make the adjustments. And if that don't work, I just use the blueprint anyways. Interestingly, the latter didn't really happen, as you will see going forward. So now our new mall includes the red variants of belts, which moves faster, and as I build further down the main bus, I'll be adding or replacing the current belts. Although I did keep the yellow underground belts, as that'll be used for an interesting design later. Also, for every new setup I show on camera, it'll be a bit more sped up, as now I feel we got the general design idea and not much explanation is needed. Now, what is our next project? Well, to determine that, I had to take into account what I currently have on the main bus and see what sciences I can make. First one, of course, was red science. Since I'm now building with more space in mind, I gave myself some wiggle room between each node just in case I need to make some adjustments without having to move everything. So the way I figured out the layout really boiled down to using a calculator I've mentioned earlier, which gives the rundown of ratios for each step, mainly for the amount of assemblers. For red science, it takes 1 assembler of iron gears to satisfy 10 assemblers of red science, assuming copper plates is constantly fed. This results in 60 red packs per minute. However, I was feeling spicy and decided to double that. Was this excessive? Well, you'll find out later. So after the calculations, I used the ghost state of items to plan out each step from the prerequisites to the final step, with the assortments of assembling machines, belts, inserters, power poles, and so on. Then when each step is finalized, I just move the segments closer together and connect them with belts. Then I place down the actual buildings and pull the goods from the main bus. Red science is ready and waiting until labs are back up. Elsewhere in the base, I've been passively getting excess stone used up in this assembler to make landfill, as someone in my chat room has suggested. I wasn't sure if I was going to need that much landfill since I don't plan on crossing large bodies of water anytime soon, but I went with it anyways. Now I move on to green science, and I mentioned the items per minute with that of red science, which is 120. So 24 assemblers of green packs, 3 for iron gears, 2 for inserters, and 1 for belts. Once the green science was active, I noticed a particular annoyance with product consumption with the green chips looking all lopsided. Now I did use the underground belt trick for this setup, but even then, the inserters would have grabbed items on the closer side first, eventually leading to this uneven mess. I just slapped down a quick splitter and belt to correct it, but I feel either it wasn't needed or there was just a better way. I now noticed that I had a lone patch of iron ore that is just not being worked on, so I made a quick mining setup to add to the production line. This is where I show you where blueprints get to the point of being optimized through the use of belt balancers. This here book I found consists of full list of blueprints to help evenly distribute goods on belts. In my case, I got 2 inputs needing to split 3 ways. Now iron production has increased further, just because. Neat. Since I need military science later, I've added coal and stone brick to the main bus. Now what's next is going to be a second mall that's going to utilize steel and copper plates to make tier 2 assembling machines and better electric poles. Thankfully this went a lot quicker than the previous mall since there was fewer items to make, and I was starting to get more confident in figuring out a decent layout. Next is military science, and this one's going to be interesting as I'm going to try a new method of sending items to the assemblers with underground belt weaving. When using 2 different tiers of underground belts, they can still operate in the same line when crossing over each other. This makes it possible to send more than 2 items in one straight line, so no need for a second belt and long inserters. Heck, I even did it for piercing rounds. Although the downside of doing this is that it can be really hard to tell what's flowing where and if the inserters are grabbing all of them. There's our military science, baby. Now the last thing I can currently make is blue science, but I'll need a good amount of space for this as this isn't going to involve basic oil processing. We're going to be going advanced with this one. Fortunately, I had this research prior to the teardown. So with advanced oil processing, not only am I making petroleum gas, but I am now dealing with byproducts of heavy oil and light oil. And if there was anything that I have learned from Divine Journey 2 in Minecraft, if byproducts aren't managed, it'll clog up the machines, and this is no different. Thankfully, the byproducts can be worked on in chemical plants to ultimately become petroleum gas as well through oil cracking. Let's grab some water and I'll show what needs to be done. So I first hook up the water and oil pipes to the refineries, which it does look messy. Then I have to figure out the pipe layout to divert the products to their respective tanks and then their subsequent chemical plants, which is even more messier. This is really why I think beginning with pipes is much worse. But by focusing on one product at a time and laying out the complete path, it was manageable, but it still looks awful. Now I can get the last steps of making sulfur and plastic. Now to finally reintroduce the oil, add the power, and see what happens. And sulfur and plastic is back on track. But I got some bad news. My initial iron ore spot is basically depleted, but I still have the second spot close by. I still got to keep an eye on coal, however, because no power would be a sad time. So continuing on with blue science, I'll now need the prerequisites of advanced circuits and engine units. With the hefty requirement for blue science to make 120 per minute, I'll need matching production for red chips and then some, as red chips will still be used elsewhere. So I added extra assemblers for red chip production. Looking back at this, some of the inserters weren't properly aligned, so some of the machines were actually useless, and it didn't get fixed until much later. I at least realized the setup for copper cables was weird, so I fixed that. And another achievement, not getting tracked on Steam. I'm still sad about that. Now that last piece I need for blue science is engine units. And they're equally absurd. Given the odd ratios for pipes, the extras can be stored away for later use. Much like red circuits, the amount of assemblers used here is more than what's needed for blue science, as engine units will be used for later. Now that I have something very iron consuming as engine units, the lack of resources is clearly showing. Game, stop reminding me about my modding decisions. Well, time to bring it all together. Finally, caught back up with progression. Now it's all about finding a spot for the labs, which will be here on the south side of the main bus, slightly close to the start. I don't have a clean, fancy way of bringing the packs over, so I'm going to use good old spaghetti for this. As the science is approaching, I closely monitor the power and the resource input to see how big of a nosedive this will be. Not as bad as I thought for power. Resources, on the other hand, is what I expect. Too low. But I'm glad I'm researching again, as there are some I wanted to get my hands on, like electric engines. You can tell I went way too heavy on the production when this is how fast research is going. Or maybe research was done improperly with this belt setup of red and green, so I reverted back to the 2-belt and long-handed inserter setup. I should probably check the power again. Oh god! Well, it turns out with coal being actively used elsewhere, the boilers aren't getting enough to be fully functional. That and the coal patch is getting low, so I'll have to deal with that at some point. I'll just flip the splitter to prioritize the boilers while I move on over to make some moderate changes to oil. So right now, the oil is all being converted to petroleum gas. But now that research is back up, I've unlocked the process of making lubricant. Stop it! This is a step that is needed for electric engines, as well as for top tier belts. Though, sadly, that was never made in this playthrough. So because of this fluid type, I need to figure out a way to balance oil processing so that 1. It never clogs up, 2. It produces enough of each type, and 3. It defaults to making petroleum gas when other fluids are near full. All of this is solved through the use of a circuit network. This is something you can unlock really early on, and it's stated that it's not needed to complete the game. However, I think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage if you don't use it, as circuit networks can control machines based on conditions you set relative to the sender. In this case, I would be controlling fluids with pumps based on the storage tank values. This was something I learned from Nilos's video on an advanced oil processing setup, and thank God I was informed on this, because if I wasn't, I would have hit another wall and having to deal with fluids constantly getting clogged. I even imported his blueprint to get a closer look at where all the wires are being hooked to, for what fluid type and its value. So now having to redo the oil setup to include 2 more chemical plants to make lubricant, I assigned a pump to enable when the lubricant tank is over 20,000 in value, and diverts heavy oil to heavy oil cracking. For light oil, pump will turn off when the tank values are over 20,000, so the remaining light oil goes to petroleum. Unfortunately, I forgot to include 2 other pumps in the setup to limit lubricant intake and enable light oil cracking when light oil has a buffer in the tank. As far as I remember, this was functioning just fine without them. And with the remaining machines back in place, oil is back in business. And with separate fluids in storage, I can now look into new items like rocket fuel. I'll be sending this light oil across the other side of the main bus to where I plan out the rocket fuel production. This will require solid fuel, and light oil gives us the best yield compared to other options. Funny enough, I need to feed said solid fuel with even more light oil for it to become rocket fuel, and this is one of the few examples of assembly machines needing fluid input to craft. So as I'm cleaning up where the old stone patch was, you're probably wondering why I need this rocket fuel. Well, that, my friend, is to begin our next project, a train system. This is where long-distance transportation is needed to get loads of resources in a timely manner. So with the second stone patch close by, I set up a quick production spot for rails, and I'll need a lot of it because it's not only used for trains, but it's also used for another item later. So I plan on having the train station located to the right of the smelters, as our obvious worry right now is coal, then iron, then copper. And having the brilliant decision of having a long belt line of rocket fuel leading to the station without any control, because I'm wasteful like that. Let's go and clear out some space, shall we? So, trains is another one of those daunting things that new players could face, which I think it's largely on how to properly set up rails. But it's more simple than you think. Since I'm focusing on one type of resource at a time, I'll only lay down tracks leading to coal, then back to the base in one loop. I don't even have to use signals yet. With rails and grenades in tow, I'm on the move. While I clear out the path, leave a like if this video has been informative, as this series does take a lot of effort. Many thanks in advance. We'll be needing radars down here so we can monitor trains from afar. Feels strange when they're not attacking, huh? So here is our nearest coal spot. Now it's a matter of continuing the loop. And the whole track is planned out. After placing down the actual track, I added the train stop and named it as coal pickup, and designed a massive mining outpost for coal to be collected. Actually, given the size of this setup, I needed to shift the main track over for some wiggle room. To follow up the multiple belts leading to our chests, I'll need a balancer to even out the load. Mining outpost is almost done, so let's prep the train with rocket fuel. And to give it a schedule with the following stations I have set up. Mining outpost to collect, and leaves when full, and returns to empty the cargo, then repeats. To prepare for the incoming coal, I also build another balancer. Well, I think this station is all set. Let's hitch a ride. So since I need large quantities of goods transported, I have one of the last variants of inserters called stack inserters. They have the same speed as fast inserters, but they're capable of moving multiple items per swing. And there it goes. I didn't have enough stack inserters, so I at least signed them to drop the coal into the cargo wagons. And if you're wondering why I'm using steel chests, it is to serve as a buffer for when the train is not present, so it'll be ready to pick up ASAP. I am aware that there's another loading and unloading design which uses both sides of the cargo wagon, but for this playthrough, I didn't think it was needed. Now, off we go! And that is the simple beauty of trains. Like, seriously, it's fun sometimes just to stare at them in all of their automated glory. Taking a break to check up on things, I noticed petroleum wasn't being actively used, meaning other fluids like light oil is drying up. As a backup plan, I made another chemical plant to use petroleum to make solid fuel for rocket fuel, only when light oil is below 5,000 units. Back to working on trains as our receiving area needs more space. Here's our second station for iron, and we're going to have to straighten this line here so that the other track can merge, as well as the copper station. So because of the increasing need for stack inserters for our trains, I made a quick setup right at about where the red circuits enter the main bus. Back at the train station, some rerouting was needed for rocket fuel to apply to other trains just by underground belting them. In fact, I produced way more than enough rocket fuel for the time being, so I disabled the setup. Oops, I apparently did my circuitry wrong and I hooked it to the belt. No wonder research was on hold. So now that I'm already adding a second train into the mix, let's discuss rail signals. As best as I can, that is. Rail signals are responsible for preventing train crashes by designating blocks of space on the rails. When a train goes past it, trains before the signal cannot enter until the other train in the front goes past another signal. And to extend the reach of a block in cases of merges and crossings, there is a chain signal that'll copy the normal signal ahead of them. In this example, there are 4 chain signals placed before the merges that all lead up to one normal signal. When one train goes through, the other chain signal will go red, preventing the other train from going through. To keep things simple when dealing with merges and crossings, just remember this phrase: chain in, rail out. Something I didn't do early on was placing normal signals regularly along the main path so multiple trains can't travel. In this case, the next normal signal was located here at this split off, so once a train passes this, a train back at base can now move. Since I'm working with a few yet fast trains, it wasn't a big deal, and I did fix this later on. One big thing to keep in mind, however, when designing your entire train network is to decide the size of your trains. Pick what the upper limit of your train length is going to be and stick with it. When you design a station that is meant for 1-4, which is 1 locomotive and 4 wagons, and you bring in a train that is 1-6, at best, it's an awkward situation and destructive at worst. Same thing applies for placing rail signals, especially along the main path. Anyways, setting up the iron and copper spots was the same song and dance like with coal. It's just a matter of connecting them properly with rails afterwards. So now resources has greatly increased, and because of the source being in the millions, this will last long after I reach the first rocket launch. But with all the new mining drills doing their business, it needs matching power, so another array of steam engines was made. So overall, I understand the appeal of trains now. It might be basic for what I did, but it was definitely serviceable. And if you thought that was fun, just wait until the next project, of which you'll know about right away when you hit that sub and bell. See ya, well wishers!